to convene for general speeches until about 6 p.m. Tomorrow, the Senate will consider judicial nominations for district judges in New Jersey. It'll also vote to limit debate on Senator Coburn's plan to repeal ethanol-related tax provisions. Live coverage of the Senate always here on C-SPAN 2.
Order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal Lord God, the center of our joy, your word says you bless those who do not walk in the counsel of the ungodly. You also say that those who delight in your word day and night are like fruitful trees planted by streams of water. Today, let your word guide those who serve here on Capitol Hill. Infuse our senators and their staffs with your presence, power, and peace. Lord, make your power available to them hour by hour, so that they will have the physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual stamina to complete the duties of this day. And Lord, in the midst of the business of this day, allow them to experience your peace that passes all understanding. We pray in your gracious name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., June 13, 2011. To the Senate. Under provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Richard Blumenthal, a senator from the state of Connecticut, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President Pro Tempore.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 6 p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Mr. President,
The senator from Nebraska.
Mr. President, I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The senator from South Dakota.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I would also ask unanimous consent that I be allowed to enter into a colloquy with my colleague from Nebraska, Senator Joe Hansen.
Without objection.
Mr. President, tomorrow the Senate will vote on a cloture motion that deals with an amendment that would do away with a tax provision that was enacted many years back by Congress, but was extended just this last December. And in fact, there were a whole series of tax extenders that were passed by the Congress in December of last year. But this particular one, the volumetric ethanol excise tax credit, was also extended. It was extended until the end of the year 2011. So December 31 this year is when it would expire. What the amendment that we will be voting on tomorrow, or at least the cloture motion we'll be voting on, is with regard to an amendment that would eliminate that and end it now. And there's just a number of problems associated with that approach, Mr. President. I think one of which is there is this issue of economic certainty. We have lots of people across this country who have made investments. We have lots of jobs that are impacted by this industry. And in fact, if you look at, there are 204 plants, ethanol plants, in America today, spread across 29 states, and on the order of about 500,000 jobs, all of which, I might add, are American jobs. So you've got 500,000 American jobs impacted by this industry. The ironic thing, too, Mr. President, is coming on the heels of an announcement last week that Venezuela, Libya, and Iran will block OPEC from producing more oil to relieve gasoline prices. We continue to be held more and more hostage every single day by our addiction to foreign oil. In fact, we send $1 billion a day outside of the United States to purchase foreign oil. $1 billion every single day to purchase foreign oil. The ethanol industry, which now represents about 10% of the fuel mix in this country, displaces 445 million barrels of oil every single year. That is the equivalent of $34 billion that we don't send overseas. 445 million barrels of oil displaced every single year. $34 billion that we don't have to spend purchasing foreign oil. And so this is an issue that has a direct bearing, Mr. President, on the issue of energy independence, the issue of continuing this, what I think is a very dangerous dependence upon foreign sources of energy, foreign oil, and has a direct bearing as well on the price that consumers in this country pay at the pump. Clearly, if you took 10% of the fuel mix in this country out of production or out of that mix, you would put an additional pressure on the price that currently is being paid by consumers. In fact, there was a study done by Iowa State University that said in 2010, if you took away the contribution that ethanol makes to the fuel mix in this country today, you would see gasoline prices increase by 89 cents per gallon. Well, when you're already facing $4 gasoline prices in this country, which I think is having a profound impact on our economy, and particularly on consumers who day in and day out are having to deal with these high prices, it seems ironic that we'll be looking at legislation, at policy that would further drive up the cost of gasoline in this country. We ought to be looking at ways that we can reduce it. And this clearly it would have the opposite effect. I think we talked about a few weeks ago, there was a proposal to put additional taxes on oil and gas, or at least to change some tax policy with regard to oil and gas, which many of us argued would add to the cost of gasoline in this country, that essentially if you would in effect be raising taxes on gasoline in this country. Well, this proposal would have the same effect. It would increase the cost of energy in this country and obviously impact many of the jobs to which I just alluded. And it would also break faith, I think, Mr. President, with the commitment that was made by this Congress last December when we extended the VTEC, the volumetric ethanol excise tax credit, for another year. You've got lots of folks who have made investments. You have people across this country whose livelihoods, whose jobs depend upon this. And I think it makes sense when we put policy in place, and we say that it's going to be in place for a certain period of time, that be honored. Now, having said that, I have been working closely with my colleague from Nebraska and others of our colleagues, on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, on a proposal that would reform the VTEC and move us in a direction that I think puts us on a pathway or a trajectory into the future that will take greater advantage of this contribution that's being made by biofuels to our country's energy independence, and also phase out the VTEC tax credit, and but does it in a way that doesn't impact and disrupt in a way that this would, you say today that you're going to end this today. And as I said, you've got lots of people who've made investment decisions based upon current policy. You would change that policy immediately and abruptly. That is not the right way or the correct way to go about this. There is a better way, and that's what my colleague from Nebraska and I have been working on. And I hope that our colleagues here in the Senate will vote against this attempt tomorrow to end this abruptly and to disrupt this market and do, I think, tremendous harm to an industry that is contributing in a significant way to America's move toward energy independence and is helping to keep gas prices lower than they would otherwise be were it not for the 10% contribution that ethanol makes year in and year out to our energy in this country. And so there are lots of reasons why we think it's a bad idea to move forward with the amendment that will be offered tomorrow and the cloture motion that would get on that amendment. And I hope that my colleagues will defeat that cloture motion so that we can work on a more responsible, reasonable way that phases out the VTEC and in a responsible way that would allow those who have made investments to be able to plan accordingly. So I would simply say, Mr. President, as we get into that debate tomorrow, that this is an issue which has ramifications for our economy because of the price of fuel and the impact that ethanol has on the price of fuel in this country. It has an impact on the whole issue of energy independence and whether we're going to continue to be held hostage and over a barrel by oil that we have to import from other places around the world. And, of course, it has implications as well for just the jobs that are created here at home, American jobs that could very well be lost if we move down a path that, in my view, would be very harmful to this industry and its ability to create jobs. And so I have my colleague from Nebraska here as well this afternoon, Mr. President, and I would welcome his thoughts on this subject and would like to enter into a dialogue with him about the impact that this industry has on his state of Nebraska, and not just the impact that it has on Nebraska or South Dakota, but the impact that it has on this country by creating jobs here in this country, by lessening the dependence that we have on foreign sources of energy, and by keeping gas prices at a more reasonable level than we otherwise would see were it not for the contribution that ethanol makes to our fuel mix. And so I'm going to yield to the Senator from Nebraska for his observations about this subject.
Mr. President.
Senator from Nebraska.
I want to start out today and thank my colleague from South Dakota. He has been a very reasoned voice on this issue, and he's brought forward some ideas that I believe are the right approach to dealing with ethanol, absolutely the right approach. You know, if you think about it, about 50% of our oil is now imported from another part of the world. But the more dramatic piece of that is that oftentimes the importation of that oil comes from parts of the world that do not share our philosophy, do not share our view of the world, are not democracies, and do everything they can to, in effect, fight against what we believe in. So not only are we dependent on foreign oil, we are dependent on a source of foreign oil that oftentimes is contrary to the values and beliefs of American citizens. Now, one of these days, I think we're going to learn the lesson of that dependence, and we're going to alter our course. And we're going to do a whole host of things that make sense, more drilling, more exploration, more nuclear power plants, as Senator Lamar Alexander has advocated for, And just everything on the list, it's all a piece of the puzzle. Well, a piece of that puzzle is also renewable fuels. Could be biodiesel, it could be ethanol, it could be cellulosic ethanol, which I championed when I was Secretary of Agriculture. But again, I think it's going to be a whole host of things. Now, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, if I were on the Senate floor making those statements, many would have looked at me and said, well, Mike, that's just a pipe dream. But as the senator from South Dakota points out, 10% of our fuel in the United States is now ethanol, 10%. It did displace 445 million barrels of oil last year. There's just nothing else going on out there that has had that kind of impact. And we can report today that $34 billion was kept in the U.S. economy. We often hear about this massive transfer of wealth that is occurring by us sending our hard-earned dollars to other parts of the world, again, parts of the world that don't share our values. Well, in this case, with this product, we kept $34 billion here. And at least one study indicates that the average family saved $800 a year because of this. And our gas prices are about 89 cents lower per gallon than they otherwise would have been. So those are real savings to people who are out there trying to figure out how to pay for filling up the tank. Well, many years ago when I was governor of Nebraska, we took a long, hard look at our state. And we wanted to know how we might best diversify our economy. Well, some of the things we did worked. I'm very pleased to report that our unemployment rate during this time never got over 5%. Today it's about 4.2%. I'm also pleased to tell you that we balanced the budget and we don't borrow money to do it. But one of the things that we did is we said, look, ethanol is a piece of this puzzle in Nebraska. And so we actually created state programs to try to encourage the construction of ethanol plants. I will tell you at the time when I was governor, I thought maybe 2 plants would be built. Well, the marketplace responded and we built a number of plants. Today, Nebraska is the second largest producer of ethanol. We have 24 plants in the state. Those 24 plants produce 2 billion gallons per year, $4 billion worth of capital investment. It directly employs 300 Nebraskans in high-quality jobs. But it also does some great things for our livestock sector because our cattle industry, well, they buy the distiller grains. They have real value if you're feeding cattle, which we do a lot of in our state. Well, we have recognized in Nebraska, and I think across the country, that it's time to move to the next step when it comes to ethanol production. That's why I was pleased to sign on to Senator Grassley's bill when he introduced it. I was also pleased to work with Senator Thune, who's provided such excellent leadership in this area. And basically what this plan does is it says, let's take a thoughtful, measured approach. Let's not jeopardize someone's situation and cause them to pay higher fuel prices at the pump because we did something in a rash and hasty sort of way. It also helps to pay off some of the deficit. We're literally saying, okay, if we're going to make some changes, we'll make a contribution to deficit reduction. Well, let me just wrap up my comments and say Senator Thune's approach is the right approach. It is an approach that says, look, we're not going to take this industry, which has become such an important part of our energy strategy, and walk it off the cliff and just see how it lands. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to take a measured approach, We're going to build the infrastructure necessary. We're going to add some money to reduce the deficit. And we're not going to jeopardize somebody's price at the pump. It's already expensive enough. So I'm very pleased to support that approach. My hope is that our colleagues will listen to this approach, get behind it and support it, because it is the right approach. It is the right approach for Nebraska, but it is the right approach for the country. With that, I thank the senator from South Dakota for his help on this, and I yield the floor to him.
Mr. President, if I might just say to the senator from Nebraska, and I'm wondering if perhaps in his discussions with farmers and ranchers in his state, I'm sure the issue that he alluded to, which I think is an important one, comes out. But I'm wondering if other people around the country realize that when you make a gallon of ethanol, you take a kernel of corn, which is a remarkable thing that we've gotten to where the technology enables us to do this, you produce 2.7 gallons of ethanol from a bushel of corn. So you get almost 3 gallons of ethanol from a bushel of corn, which goes into, as I said earlier, our fuel supply in this country, now represents about 10% of all the fuel that we use in this country. But I wonder if a lot of people realize that one of the byproducts of that, as the senator from Nebraska has mentioned, is something called dry distiller's grain. And that DDGs, as we refer to it, is something that is used then to feed livestock. Now, a lot of people think that there's this whole corn debate about food versus fuel, but I don't think most Americans maybe realize that only about 12% of our corn crop in this country actually ends up in foods. They're either consumed directly, like corn chips, or indirectly in the form of high fructose corn syrup. But a third of the grain that goes into ethanol production comes out as dried distiller's grains, as DDGs. And each bushel of corn used in the ethanol-making process produces, as I said, the 2.7 gallons of ethanol, 18 pounds of DDGs and 18 pounds of carbon dioxide. If you took, let's just say, for example, 5 billion bushels of corn used for ethanol production in a year, the feed product equivalent of about 1.7 billion bushels of corn is returned to the livestock food chain as an ethanol byproduct. So you take about a third of all the grain that's put into the process to make ethanol, and that comes back in the form of something that we feed to livestock, and something that has been a great source of protein for livestock producers in this country. I don't think most Americans perhaps even realize that you're not just talking about the fuel component of this. You're not just talking about that liquid that we use to blend with petroleum products and get ethanol in this country, but that there's also this other byproduct which is really essential for livestock producers in this country to feed their livestock. And I'm wondering if in your conversations, I assume with your farmers and ranchers, that they're, of course, very familiar with this, but that the average person around this country really understands that.
You know, it's an excellent point. When I was Secretary of Agriculture, this whole debate started about food versus fuel. And it was almost like there was this impression that you took that bushel of corn, you somehow burned it up to create ethanol, and that's all you got out of it. And then there was this big debate about whether that was really worth it. But as the senator from South Dakota points out, that a whole different process is occurring. And so in our state, it's not just the dried distiller grains, because to dry them down takes some energy, but we have the cattle yards in close proximity to the ethanol plants, and so they buy the wet mash, is what we call it. They ship it over, they feed it immediately, and it is a wonderful product to feed to cattle, to feed out cattle. You know, if you think about the approach that the senator from South Dakota has come up with, it hits on all cylinders. It does reform the ethanol tax credit. And again, I believe the industry has come to the conclusion that that is a thoughtful, reasonable step. Number two, it invests in the blender pumps. One of the challenges I had for a long time, a flex fuel vehicle. And, you know, I'm in the state that is the second largest producer of ethanol, and yet I could not get the E85 unless we really went out and searched for it. Well, what if you had a pump where I could literally pull up to it and dial it up to E85 and put that in my vehicle? So it invests in the blender pumps. It extends the small producer and cellulosic tax credits. And here's what I would say. The next generation is not going to be just corn-based ethanol. That will be a part of the picture, but I believe we will see the day, and we are already seeing the day, where you will have a cellulosic product converted into ethanol. And then finally, $1 billion is added to deficit reduction, where the ethanol industry is saying, look, we agree we need to do our share. We agree we need to start on this process of phasing this out. And so I just think the senator from South Dakota has hit all the right points. It does not take this industry and drop it off the cliff. It's a thoughtful, measured approach to dealing with this issue. And again, I thank the senator for his leadership, and I yield to the senator from South Dakota.
I would just say in closing, and thank you, that thanks to the senator from Nebraska, Senator Johanns, who has a great wealth of experience, not only having grown up on a family farm in his early years, but representing his state as a mayor, as a governor, and then representing our nation as a Secretary of Agriculture. And I recall working with you when you were Secretary of Agriculture on a lot of these issues. And one of the things that strikes me about where we are today relative to where we were then is that the prosperity that's returned to the agricultural sector in our economy, to rural America, you can't say has been that the biofuels industry has been solely responsible for that, but certainly a contributing factor. And we've seen growth in the economy in the Midwest. And again, the thing I would point out about this, which is so important in this, I think for people to realize, is that these are American jobs. I mean, this is our homegrown industry. We're either going to get fuel here in the United States or we're going to buy it from some foreign country. And that's what we've been doing, and that's what we continue to do, to the tune of $1 billion every single day. And so to the degree that we can promote domestic energy production in this country and add to the supply in this country, which is what biofuels does, it is a good thing for the American consumer, and obviously a good thing for America's economy and the dangerous dependence that I think we currently have on foreign energy. And so the proposal of which you are a co-sponsor, that you and I have worked together on, that we will file as a bill today, will present an alternative to the approach that will be advanced, or they will attempt to advance tomorrow, which is to just right now, in a very disruptive way, abruptly end something that we just voted on in December to put in place, and that we've got people who've made investments in, and that has a tremendous impact on jobs in this country. The approach that you and I are advocating for, I believe, is a reasoned approach. It is forward-looking in the sense that it promotes the next generation of biofuels, advanced biofuels, cellulosic ethanol. In the same way that you mentioned, gets us to where we have more choices for American consumers when they come into a filling station by investing in some of the pumps that are out there and giving consumers more choices. And then, finally, as you said, also puts money toward the debt, toward deficit reduction, and phases out the tax credit that is available today to ethanol producers in this country. It is a reasonable, I believe responsible, and as you said, measured way of dealing with this, not the way that is being proposed by the vote that we're going to have tomorrow. So I hope that we can, our colleagues will join us and work in a constructive way to continue to grow this industry, do it in a way that creates jobs for Americans and lessens our dependence upon foreign energy. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, I'm going to talk about the basic underlying bill that we're debating, not the amendment that my colleagues have just been talking about, the economic development bill. And as a way of framing the discussion about this bill, cite some statistics that I think will help us understand the nature of the problem that our country faces right now, and why, in my opinion, this particular legislation does not solve that problem. According to official statistics, The unemployment rate in the United States has risen from 6.8% when President Obama was elected in November of 2008 to 9.1% in May of 2011. Between the end of 2008 and the year 2010, America experienced a net job loss in the non-farm sector of almost 7 million jobs. So just since the end of 2008 through 2010, 7 million job loss. In that same time, the unemployment rate peaked at 10.1%. That was in October of 2009. It averaged 9.3% during 2009, 9.6% during 2010. And the 5-month average for 2011 so far is 9.1%, right where we are right now. We're not making progress. In short, since President Obama's stimulus was enacted, unemployment has averaged more than 9% a year, and that's up from 6.8% when he took office. This is not progress. The May unemployment figures show that the U.S. economy added only 54,000 jobs, far fewer than the 150,000 that are needed just to keep pace with population growth, let alone to help dig us out of the recession. So we only had about a third of the jobs created that we need just to stay even. We're getting deeper in the hole. In fact, the number of unemployed total now almost 14 million Americans, and the long-term unemployed increased to 6.2 million. Real growth in our economy, the GDP growth from the end of the recession in mid-2009, has been only about half as strong as it was during each of the previous 9 recessions since World War II. So unlike previous times, we're not recovering as fast as we recovered from those earlier recessions. On the TV program Meet the Press this weekend, the host David Gregory asked the chair of the Democratic National Committee, Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz, why should Americans trust democratic governance right now on the economy, particularly the president's? And amazingly, the head of the Democratic National Committee answered, because we were able to, under President Obama's leadership, turn this economy around. Well, the economy has not turned around. The unemployment statistics I just cited demonstrate that it's getting worse. Most observers recognize that the steps that the president took to try to revive the economy have not worked. I think it's time that we admit that our massive debt and deficit, which were exacerbated by the 2009 stimulus spending bill, have hurt our economy. It's made things worse. Now, Republicans are not recommending reductions in government spending just for the sake of austerity. We're pushing for the government to get its fiscal house in order so that the job creators in the private sector will have the confidence to begin hiring and expanding their operations. Right now, uncertain of their future tax liability, worried about the general fiscal path of this country, and the increasing regulatory burdens imposed upon them, job creators are sitting on the sidelines. We need to cut government spending to keep our tax burden low, approve pending free trade agreements, and make a serious effort to reduce red tape so that our economy can begin growing again. In other words, we need to realize that the government does not create private sector jobs. What we can do here in Washington is to create the environment where the private sector is free to grow and create jobs. Now, this bill that we're talking about right now, the Economic Development Bill, it's the Economic Development Revitalization Act of 2011, is touted by some of its proponents as being a job creator. The bill is not a jobs bill. Calling it that doesn't make it so. The bill has 21 sections. The truth is many of these provisions would have zero effect on facilitating the creation of American jobs. For example, moving the jurisdiction, well, let me get this exactly right here. Moving Section 16 moves the state of Montana from the Denver office to the Seattle office. That doesn't create any jobs. Most of the provisions of the bill don't have anything to do with creating jobs. There are only 4 that even mildly could be called relating to job creation. The central component is a reauthorization of the bill's amount of spending, and it would reauthorize it at $500 million a year, $500 million a year. Remember that almost half of that has to be borrowed. We don't have the money to spend $500 million a year. So we'll have to go out and borrow the money from someone in order to be able to spend it. Given the fiscal constraints facing our nation today, we can't afford that. And ironically, even the White House is not shy about admitting the fact that this bill, this EDA bill, is too expensive. Specifically, the President's budget for 2012 requested only $324.9 million for EDA, not $500 million. Additionally, the administration statement of administration policy declared, and I quote, "The bill would authorize spending levels higher than those requested by the President's budget." And the administration believes that the need for smart investments that help America win the future must be balanced with the need to control spending and reduce the deficit. End of quote. Well, this is one thing on which I agree with the administration. This bill would spend too much money. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to vote on amendments, including one by the ranking Republican on the committee, Mr. Inhofe, to reduce this level to a more reasonable and realistic one. The rest of the bill includes provisions, as I noted, that are of little importance. Section 11, for example, creates a $5 million per grant program related to renewable energy and brownfield sites. Section 12 relates to energy and water efficiency and decreasing oil competition. These are part of the green jobs fad and are not really going to provide significant job creation for our country. If we really want to decrease consumption of foreign oil, of course, and create U.S. jobs, we should develop more of our own resources. I mentioned another meaningless provision, just moving one state from the jurisdiction of the Denver to the Seattle office. And again, these are things that are not going to produce jobs in our country. So it seems to me, Mr. President, that rather than on spending time on bills like this EDA bill, which won't actually create jobs, we should actually be focusing on the big cliff we're heading for and begin preparing for the debt ceiling debate. This is where we can insist on a very large down payment of reduced spending, reform entitlements, and put a straitjacket on future congressional budgets, all of which will give businesses and markets greater certainty about our fiscal future. As a start, we should have a thorough debate and a vote on a constitutional balanced budget amendment, which would get us on the right path to a sound fiscal future. In the long run, the only way for our economy to create jobs is for the government to spend, borrow, and tax less, thus freeing America's enterprises to do what they do best. Mr. President, I suggest that we not wait any longer. It's time to begin this debate. Let's have a vote on the constitutional amendment and find ways to reduce spending, ensure that we don't increase taxes, and create the climate in which America's businesses can get back to work and put their fellow Americans back to work. Mr. President, I note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
suspended.
Without objection.
I want to address the issue of patent reform, a bill that the Senate has already passed, and we passed by an overwhelming margin. It is my understanding that the House of Representatives is expecting to pass that the House wants, and in the process, the House wants the Senate to agree very soon thereafter and do it without a formal conference. I want my colleagues to understand why I hope that the House-passed bill will contain a provision that was not in our Senate bill but passed unanimously out of the House Judiciary Committee. The House Committee report recognized that the, quote, need to modernize our patent laws has found expression in the courts, end of quote, but that, and quote again, the courts are constrained in their decisions by the text of statutes at issue, end of quote. That's from the House Committee report. The House Judiciary Committee amendment that passed unanimously resulted from a recent federal court case that had its genesis in the difficulty that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Patent Office face when deciding how to calculate Hatch-Waxman deadlines. Hatch-Waxman law was a compromise between drug patent holders and generic manufacturers. Under the Waxman-Hatch law, once a patent holder obtains a market approval, the patent has 60 days, the patent holder has 60 days to request the Patent Office to restore the patent term's time lost because of the FDA's long deliberating process eating up valuable patent rights. The citation for the case that I'm talking about is 731 Federal Supplement 2nd 470. The court case found, quote, the FDA treats submission to the FDA received after its normal business hours differently than it treats communications from the agency after normal hours. When notice of FDA approval is sent after normal business hours, the combination of the Patent Trade Office's calendar day interpretation and its new counting method effectively deprives applicant of a portion of the 60-day filing period that Congress expressly granted them, and applicant could lose a substantial portion, if not all, of its time for filing a patent trademark extension application as a result of the mistakes beyond its control. An interpretation that imposes such drastic consequences when the government errs could not be what Congress intended. That's the end of the judge's statement on why he ruled as he did in this particular case. Congress did not intend those drastic consequences that happens as a result of a difference between whether or not you are making an application to or an application from an agency. In other words, there shouldn't be any difference. Congress did not intend the consequences that can come from such a different application of the law. So the court clarified the law so that when FDA sends a notice of approval after normal business hours, the 60-day period requesting patent restoration begins the next business day. The House Judiciary Committee takes the court decision where common sense dictates to protect all patent holders against losing patent extension as a result of confused counting calculations. So I want to quote Ranking Member Conyers of the House Judiciary Committee, who sponsored the amendment, and the committee chairman Smith, who supported Mr. Conyers. Ranking Member John Conyers stated during markup, the amendment is needed to, and I quote him, remove what amounts to a trap and would clarify the term business day. And so our attempt here is to make the congressional effort at patent reform more clear and more efficient. Chairman Lamar Smith also advocated passage of this amendment during markup in the House Judiciary Committee, and I would quote him, I will recognize myself in support of the amendment. Now, the gentleman's amendment, meaning the Conyers amendment, clarifies the counting rules that are imposed on patent holders who must submit documents to the agency within statutory time limits. It has been established that the Patent and Trademark Office has inconsistently applied these rules, which is not fair to various patent holders. The gentleman's amendment tracks the recent court case, and that's the court case I've already cited. I want to start that sentence over. The gentleman's amendment tracks the recent court case decided in favor of a patent holder that originally applied for an extension 10 years ago. My understanding is that there are not scoring problems with this provision, and I support it, is what Chairman Lamar Smith of the House Judiciary Committee said. Now, this is a common-sense amendment. It improves our patent system fairness through certainty and clarity. And I hope that the House will leave that in their bill when it sends it over here to the Senate. My interest in this amendment is because I opposed it 2 or 3 years ago when it was first brought up. Because of the court decision, I'm convinced the different application of the 60-day rule is very, very unfair. As ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I want the House Judiciary Committee to know that several Republican and Democrat senators have asked me to support the Conyers legislation, the Conyers language as well. I yield the floor. And I suggest the absence of a quorum.